All right, so we are going to start recording about now. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat and try to keep an eye on the waiting room, and we'll see how that goes.
I can help you moderate the
All
chat
right.
at least.
All righty, let's see here. Okay, so I am Praxilla Taurina. I have a 16th century Venetian persona, and I have an unholy obsession with lace and patterns, more patterns than actual lace. Just to be upfront about that right now, I do make a little bit of lace, but I'm much more interested in the printing industry and much more interested in the patterns themselves. I know just enough about making lace to get myself into a lot of trouble. So mostly I know the different types so that I can look at a picture and identify it. So if you have technical questions about making lace, I will have to refer you to somebody else because I am not up to answering those technical questions. However, I'm pretty good at knowing who has the answers, so I just don't necessarily have them. I'm a beginner at about 12 kinds of lace, primarily needle lace. I know almost nothing about bobbin lace other than what it looks like. I've seen people do it. I've taken 2 classes on it and gone, I can't keep track of this. Just give me the piece of thread with the needle and I will keep track of that. I am not a bobbin lace person because it involves way more coordination than I have. But I am really good at looking at a piece of something and identifying a piece of bobbin lace. So I'm the person who is fascinated by embroidery who doesn't do as much embroidery. I know that's a very strange concept, but that's where we're at. So we're going to talk about 16th century pattern books, which are my true love. They are called many things. Exemplar, you'll also see them. I refer to them as model book more often than not, modelbucher. It's the German term. And I use that term because you turn up a lot more things when you search model book with the UCH than you do when you attempt to look for lace book. Lace book will turn you up so many things that you can't search it very well. So I use model book because it is also the term used by the major source book on where to find those things. This is Arthur Lotz. He is astounding. This is the major source on the subject. It is a bit difficult to come by, but actually not right now. There's more copies available now than I've seen in quite some time. I was looking on A-Books this morning, and I think there's 5 copies. Now they do start a little high because this was published in the 30s and then again in the 60s, so it's not a new book. But it is available, and I do my absolute best to provide the information other places. I'm all about let's find a free source for info, so that's what I try to do.
Prax, can you tell us what that book name was again?
It is on my next slide.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, we will look at sources here. It is the very first one there, the Bibliographie du Modelbucher, Arthur Lotz. I am a source person. I want to have as many sources as possible. So we'll start with that, and I will have this available. I didn't get this one published in time because I was still tweaking things. So, but I will get this Google presentation available. But yes, lots is the major source. The other major source for what we're doing, which is looking at a pattern and looking at the lace in a portrait or in an extant piece and trying to match up those patterns, is this next one, Margaret Abeg's Apropos Patterns. It is also surprisingly right now much more available than it's been in the past. I saw a couple of copies for like $40 as opposed to like 200. So, but again, I try to put as much of this information in other places where it's available. I'm currently working on a couple of books, but I've been slowed down by a variety of things. The next book on the resource guide is A Lace Guide for Makers and Collectors by Gertrude Whiting. That's a 1920 book. It is available for free at that link right there on Archive. There is a huge amount of lace information on Archive in addition to several other places, but it's pretty accessible on Archive right now. The next book is Old Italian Lace by Elisa Ricci. Elise, was an astounding collector and writer, and her books are the definitive sources. That's one of those things that's going to be interesting about model books and old lace. The books are old. There's not been a lot written recently. There are a lot of writers currently working on things, and there's been a few things that have come out in the last year or two, and there are some things that are currently coming out and in the pipeline, but there was a big gap. So most of the books are conveniently available either out of print and you can't get a hold of it, or out of print and it's free. So those are the two options. Next book this is another one that's quite available. It's the Design from Merletti and Ricamo. This one is available from Nuovo S1, who is an Italian lace publisher, and they have an astounding catalog. They're pretty easy to get, other than shipping from Italy, and right now isn't the best time for that. One you can get easily off Amazon is Marian McNeely's book. She just published it last year, and it is a compilation of German needlework and weaving pattern books. She pulled them directly off the Met. So, and the Met's astounding for that because they've got so much stuff in Creative Commons. So if you want to go to the Met, you don't have to pay for that, but she does have a really exceptional introductory essay on the model book. There's a lot of reprinted copies available. You can buy everything from, sorry, I have a giant pile of books at my feet because that's how I roll. You can buy them, published on demand, and all they are is just a picture that they pull directly off the internet from these other sources. And I have this, the last link on this page is my really needs to be updated but still has good info list of online model book that are free. That's down there at my very old blog. It should get moved to my website within the next week once I actually get my act together, and that is modelbuch.com, which is me. I'm also on Facebook, where I go through. It used to be daily, but I've been really bad the last couple of months. I go through and I match up a pattern with a piece of extant, with an extant object or a portrait, and we look at patterns that way to see what they became. Because when I first got interested in lace and embroidery, somebody said, "Oh, you absolutely should get a copy of Vinciolo's book. Dover has it, it's been published. You can get a hold of these amazing patterns from the 16th century that were put out there and published in the 16th century." And I looked at those pictures of those and went, I don't know what to do with this. So it's kind of been my thing to figure out what to do with this. And we'll get on that in a minute. Here's some of my other sources. Oops. Strange, early pattern books for lace embroidery and needlework. And that's a link to that directly. He was the precursor of Lots and went through and found a bunch of the books. Marian Hague collections at the Metropolitan Museum and the Cooper Hewitt. If you want to go looking for lace, that's a great place to search her name. And then this next one right here, Helen Huff. Oops. Helen Huff is she's a researcher and retired librarian from the University of Texas, Arlington. She's astounding. She's published quite a bit of information recently in the last couple of years, books. All of her books are free on archive. That is how she publishes them. She's done a translation and reprint of La Pompe, which is kind of the major bobbin lace book. She's got a book on Pagano, who is also one of the earlier writers on cutwork, and that book will be coming out. I'm writing the foreword for it right now, and it should be coming out in the next month. But she has a huge collection of both her own original work, her books, which is everything from graft patterns. Her charted embroidery patterns of the Renaissance has taken most of these early model books, and they are recharted for use so that you can go in and look at it, print it out, and use it. So she's got those, as well as links to a good portion of the books out there that are just scanned and available on the internet. Okay, since I jumped the gun, I'll go back one slide. So we are looking at published pattern books for early lace. As I said, there's a lot of things that these were called. I use the term model book. Starting in about 1523, the publishing industry was brand new and exciting and shiny, and publishers wanted to make money. And they found out a great way to do that was to publish how-to books. And one of the things they determined to do how-to was embroidery patterns and lace patterns, because previous to this point in time, you had to hire an artist to do your embroidery pattern for you. You hired the artist, they drew your pattern directly on your linen, and then your embroiderer would embroider that for you, or you would embroider it yourself, depending on. But with the rising middling sort, you start to get people doing who have money they want to spend, but don't necessarily do the thing where they become a patron and hire an artist. And the publishing houses start to fill that in and offer patterns, and they put them out in books, just like you would now go to Joann's or whatever and pick up a book that has a quilt pattern or embroidery patterns or whatever. You pick up your quilt kit. They were doing that in the 16th century. They began in about 1523 is the first book, and that continues all the way through the 17th century. In the 17th century, samplers start to rise a little bit more. There's some interruptions in the publishing industry because of war and a few other things. But there's this golden age of published patterns where if you want a pattern for embroidery, you can go buy it from your local printing press. And they have a wide variety of patterns, everything from tagliato, which is a type of cutwork, point coupé, which is a French term for things like reticella, punto and aria, filet, lacis. And that's the thing, is all the terms change because they're coming out of different countries, and the publishers want to add all the terms all at once so that you will buy their book. But we're going to look at a few different kinds as we go through. But this is kind of a beginning of what we're going to look at. We're going to look at tagliato, point coupé, reticella, punto and aria, some filet and lacis patterns, some burrado patterns, which are the same as filet and lacis, only they're done on a woven net as opposed to a made net, and mezzomandolino, which is another kind of netting. We'll look at bobbin lace a little bit, and because there's 2 books of bobbin lace, but needle lace is queen during this time period. Right now, you'll see a lot more lace makers who make bobbin lace because it is fast, and also what our current crafts people have done. But bobbin lace at the time was seen as sort of a faster replacement way of making needle lace. So the focus is on needle lace. There are more patterns for needle lace. You can use those, some of them for bobbin lace, but needle lace is the focus. We're going to talk a little bit about how lace is used, but not a ton, because we're looking mostly at portraits. So we'll look at the specific portraits. All right, are there any questions? Can I even find the chat?
There are no questions in chat right now.
All right, awesome. Okay, so in that last slide, I talked about Marian Hague. Marian Hague is my lace saint. She's astounding. She was a researcher in the 1920s. She was a member of the Needle and Bobbin Club, which had an interesting relationship with the curatorial department at the Met. There was a give and take back and forth, which is one reason that the Met has a huge collection of lace and lace patterns. Even better, for those of us that study lace, Marian Hague went through and made plates where she took a piece of extant lace and she pasted it up with a picture of the pattern from the pattern book. And those are available on the Met site. And here are a few of them. This first one here is bobbin lace, and it's done in color and metal threads. The second one, but if you want to learn, this is exactly where I started trying to train my eye to look at a pattern and look at an extant piece. Conveniently, Marian Hague already did a lot of the work, and she has a good 30 or so of these that are on the Met. Again, you can search under province or donator. You can search for her name, and these sorts of things will pop up. And as I said, what she did was she put a piece of lace and pattern for said piece of lace. The patterns may not be exact. I find that too as I go through and look at patterns. I don't always get an exact pattern match. I'll get a sort of kind of pattern match. Some of that I think is adaptation. Some of that is patterns come from a lot of places in addition to the pattern books. And pattern books are also copying patterns that were already out there, just sort of in the ether. So you'll get a combination. But these are some of hers. This one over here is a reticella, and these are conveniently, just to make things even easier, these particular plates are from Elisabetta or Isabella Catanea Parasol. Parasol is an astounding woman. She's an engraver. She published pattern books under her own name. She was such an astounding, amazing woman with enough pull that her husband took her name, and he published using her last name as well. Rather than her taking his, he took hers. And she has 5 pattern books. They are my very favorites just because she's such an astounding woman, in addition to the fact that they're beautiful. But on top of that, not only does she put out her book, have the pattern, she's nice enough to label them for you. So we have this Merletia Piombini, which is lace with lead. The bobbins were weighted, so that's what this is. This one is point reticella, and she's done that as well. Here's another pattern, again from Parasol, with a matching piece of lace.
And this person's name again
Marian
is
Hague. It's she's on the first on the list of my sources, but it is Marian Hague. Yep. Here is another piece here. This one shows you more the cutwork style and a pattern for that cutwork style. Oops. And this one is from Pagano, and we'll get to a few more of his later. This is another reticella. This is a piece just to show you how Punto and Aria is made, where you are creating it out of nothing. It is simply it doesn't start with fabric and you take things away. It starts with thread and you add things. And there's kind of an interesting shift and flip. And like we were talking about the end of last class, needle lace sort of all meshes and melds and becomes gooey and cloudy, muddy. One technique isn't necessarily all that different from another one. They kind of meld and match, but there's some basics of how they're being put together. Additionally, some of the patterns that we'll see, one of my favorite things about them is a pattern might have been put out there for Punto and Aria, but sometimes you'll see it done in colored silk on linen as an embroidery pattern, or they'll take a needle lace pattern and work it in bobbin lace, or a bobbin lace pattern and work it in needle lace. Additionally, Renaissance lace objects, more often than not, as you go through and look at the extant pieces, other than when they've just kept the little bit, which happens a lot. Victorians were awesome for that. The pieces tend to be a mix of lace. They are a piece of this technique and a piece of that technique. And we started out with a base of reticella, and then we add a second piece. We do a needle lace piece along that, and then we'll attach a piece of bobbin lace, and I'll come to a few of those as well as we come through. Here's another piece of Hague, one of Hague's plates. This one is a pulled work. Some bobbin lace. Like I said, the reason I have these, and I recommend that anybody that, if you want to learn to match lace up, go look at Hague. She's basically put together a textbook. This is Tagliato, and it is from Pagano as well. Here's another piece of cut work. This is a piece of laces. Here's another piece of the cut work kind of shading into reticella. Like I said, they kind of get muddy. This one here is you'll see bits and pieces, like I said, where you've got mixes, matches. And a couple more of these sorts of things. Mostly I put these in here so that when I publish the presentation, you can go back and look at them later and really try to match things up. Because I think that's what the fun is training your own eye, so that you can go through and say, hey, I saw that. I started out, when looking at lace pieces, I started out with embroidery, because embroidery is sort of easier to identify, where you go and go, yep, that's an acorn. I'm going to go find another acorn. Or, oh, look, there's a mermaid. I'm going to go find another mermaid. And it's a lot easier to easily identify that than it is to go, okay, this one has 6 triangles, 12 radiating rays. It's got 3 circles over here. So it takes a little bit more that way. Okay. These next slides are from Bocelli, where you can look at his book and then look at how it's found in a portrait. These are Bavaria plates. They're intended to be worn exactly as she's wearing them, as a partlet type of thing. And you can go through and see these sorts of motifs showing up in her portrait, which makes it nice because you can go back and go, I want to make a partlet, and go find a pattern to match that up. Because many of the painters were great about painting beautiful, astounding detail, and others were not. There are some painters I go through, I just have gone through everything Bronzinov's got and Allori and gone, yep, I can match that one up. Yep, I can match that one up. And so I look at them, and then other ones I go, this is kind of foggy, so I'm gonna go with something that looks cool and I know is consistent for it. So which is fun as a reenactor. Here's another piece. This is also from Bocelli, where you see these pieces being worked into her smock. Those are really common uses for lace, is obviously on underclothing. You'll see them on underclothing, on cuffs, on collars. She's wearing one here on the end of her turban piece. The baby's swaddled in a swaddling band that has lace on it. Here's another one where we see some bits of this sort of thing we see in her partlet. But she's also got little bits of drawn work through her ruff. This is a sheet. It's an extant bed sheet, because somebody's just that extra that they're sleeping in lace. They're sleeping in, a king's ransom of lace. This one is actually quite literally that. It's got heraldry to point out to us just whose sheets these are. And you'll also see the bits and pieces here. But this is a punto and aria insert, where the insert was made and then added, and then they've done this around the edges as well. You have a really solid mix of both things to wear and things to use household goods. There are some types of lace you're going to see more common in a particular use, but not all. The one that I can say you're going to consistently see more in household goods is going to be lacis. Filet and lacis, it's the same word, is going to be consistently more often used in home furnishings. Things like bed curtains, table covers, a lot of room hangings, things like that, are going to be done in the filet, as opposed to, you don't often see that in clothing. Although there are some examples of netting used in clothing, but it's more often than not mezzo mandolina, and we'll get to that in a minute. Here's another example of a Bavaria pattern used. This one is, it's a regional style, which is why she's got the whole thing showing on the outside of her dress. But you can see she's got lace here in her Bavaria, as well as her cuffs. And I love this particular piece because it shows you the pieces of the Bavaria, or the partlet, where you have the body piece, the front flaps, and then you repeat this piece to be a collar. Here's another piece where we see it in his collar. and it's a pretty good matchup with some of these down in here. This is a Bronzino. Like I said, he's one of my very favorites because he follows them pretty consistently. And it's one of the great places to start looking because he's both very detailed as a painter and exceptional at using these patterns. This one's Vinciolo. It's a little bit earlier of a book. It was published in 1587. This is a lace piece where we can see this particular motif shown up in here. And again, we see different types of netting being used. We've got inserts of linen with drawn thread on the edges, and it's made into a tablecloth. This is a later style, which is the point coupe. It is specifically much more French. Vinciolo was hired to work in the French court. He is Italian, but he was hired by Catherine Medici to be her maker of ruffs. And so a lot of the French style comes from the Italian back and forth. But you'll see these beautiful sort of knotwork kind of things in her ruff. Here's another one of the same style where you'll see this more reticello look with a needle lace type edging. These are some of the network I was talking about earlier, the mezzo mandolina. This is Eleonora de Toledo. And you'll see this worked net that she's using as a partlet, whereas the net's made and then it's embroidered over the top. And lace is the same way. It's just in a lot of cases, for instance, you'll see mezzo mandolina has this, the squares are done so that they are, they're not straight across, they're diamonds, which is one of the hallmarks of it. It's also not quite as, filet tends to do your pattern in a linen stitch, so it's darned, and it goes, each square is done pretty consistently, where if you look at this one, you'll see that you're using not so much a variety of stitches, but more of a variety of stitch lengths and thicknesses. So this is much, this is going to be solid, and these are more open and wrapped, and that's one of those things about needle lace. It's mostly the same, some form of wrapping buttonhole stitch or a detached buttonhole stitch where it's not completely tied. I mean, not completely knotted, but you're just pulling and manipulating threads with knots. So there's lots of ways to build on each other for those, but you're using sort of the same sort of basis, which is one reason I love it, because it's not a difficult stitch to learn. It's just a lot of them. Are there any questions so far? Have I bored everyone out of here at this point?